Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. I'd like to explore a question that has fascinated people for millennia. How do we make sense of our world? We live in an era shaped by science, by data, methods, and techniques that allow us to understand the structures and functions of the natural world with astonishing clarity. Yet each of us also lives in a personal, subjective world filled with hopes, fears, relationships, and moral convictions. It can feel as if these two ways of experiencing reality are at odds. The scientific perspective that shows us what is, and a more mythic or imaginative perspective that shows us what matters. Today, I want to suggest that both views are vital, and that combining them is not only possible, but essential. Part 1. The two ways we see the world. Let's begin with an idea. The world can be seen as a forum for action or as a collection of things. Forum for action. This is the world of meaning, significance, value, and feeling. This side of life is expressed in art, literature, mythology, drama, and religion. It's about why we do things, why things matter, and how they should matter. Place of things. This is the world of science, where we study objects, gather facts, and measure reality. It focuses on describing how things work, what they are made of, and how we can use them effectively. We tend to think these two views, mythic and scientific, have nothing in common. In one sense, that's understandable. They ask different questions. But if we want a complete understanding of life, we need them both. The tragedy arises when we mistakenly treat the myths and stories of older societies as if they were failed scientific theories. That's not what they are. Mythic thinking, with its symbols and archetypes, is trying to answer a different question. What is the meaning of life? Or, how should we act? Part 2. Why meaning matters so much. Let's look at a simple example. Imagine a toddler who has just learned to walk. She reaches up to touch a shiny, expensive glass sculpture on a table. She notices how it feels. Cold, smooth, heavy. Suddenly her mother yells, "No! Don't touch that!" Instantly, the child learns more than just the sculpture's physical qualities. She learns something about its social and emotional meaning. It's forbidden. Touching it could upset her mother. It's precious. Its unbroken state seems more important than the child's curiosity. This lesson goes beyond the purely physical description of the sculpture, shape, color, texture, and into its significance, its value in the household, and even the potential conflict it could cause. Notice how much more is learned here than if the child had merely seen an object in a science lab. Science tells us that the glass is made of certain elements and that it refracts light. But it doesn't explain why mom values it or why the child feels stress or curiosity. This is what mythic thinking does best. It captures the meaning behind the facts. When you feel that something is scary or wonderful, that is the narrative side of your mind at work, attributing significance to events and objects. In day-to-day life, we can't simply be detached observers. We're immersed in relationships, personal projects, and moral convictions. That is why meaning matters so deeply. Part 3. The Rise of Science and the Loss of Shared Myth. For thousands of years, societies around the world crafted elaborate mythic systems, religious stories, rituals, and moral codes that united people and guided behavior. These myths answered questions like, what is our place in the universe? What is right or wrong? How should we live? Then came the scientific revolution. Galileo, Newton, Bacon, Descartes, and with it, a powerful new way to explore the world. We discovered that Earth wasn't the center of the cosmos, that stars were not just lights in the sky, but enormous suns, that nature had strict, discoverable laws. This was a game changer. But as science advanced, many began to doubt or dismiss the older myths. Suddenly, our traditional stories, our moral codes, our cosmic explanations didn't seem to match the new facts. People began to question whether there was a God in heaven or if heaven itself even existed. In the West, at least, there was a growing sense that the stories we once believed literally were now proven false. Yet, if those stories are gone, where do we find our moral compass? If we no longer agree that certain behaviors are absolutely right or wrong, how do we maintain a stable society? This dilemma became especially clear in the 20th century, when people tried to construct purely rational political ideologies, like communism or fascism, on a grand scale. These systems claimed a logical foundation, but the results were often catastrophic. It turns out that pure rationality or pure scientific thinking doesn't automatically solve our deepest moral and existential questions. Part 4. The Challenge of God is Dead. Friedrich Nietzsche famously declared, "God is dead, and we have killed him." By this, he meant that the shared religious worldview that once gave life meaning was dissolving. We now had to face a world where our old foundations might be gone. Who, he asked, would wash this blood from our hands? Who would give us meaning now? At first glance, it might sound liberating to leave behind old superstitions. But Nietzsche saw a great danger. Without a shared vision of what is right and good, how do we avoid chaos? Even if you personally don't believe in traditional religion, your everyday moral code, your sense that harming someone is wrong or that telling the truth is better than lying, is deeply influenced by millennia of mythic and religious tradition. We've inherited moral habits that we can't simply uproot without consequence. So, we find ourselves in a paradox. We are modern, scientific people who rely on measurable evidence. Yet, we still act as if some transcendent moral truths are real. We treat each other as though life is precious, that there is right and wrong, that we should behave a certain way, even though a strict, materialistic perspective doesn't necessarily prove any of that. Part 5. How mythology still guides us. The question becomes, is there a way to reconcile these viewpoints? If myth isn't primitive science, what is it? One answer is that myth is the story of how humans act in the world. It's about the dilemmas we face, the evils we must overcome, the personal transformations we must undergo, and the ideals we strive toward. It's not trying to tell us the mass of the sun or the chemical composition of water. Instead, it's addressing what truly matters for living a meaningful life. Consider the myths of creation. Many ancient stories talk about a primordial chaos from which order emerges, sky and earth, gods and humans. You might read these stories and think, that's obviously not scientific. But what if they are describing something else? The universal experience of stepping into the unknown and learning to create order out of it. When you face a sudden challenge, job loss, heartbreak, health problems, you enter a kind of personal chaos. You lose your bearings. You no longer know what the future will be. In mythic language, that's the primordial sea or dark forest. To get through it, you need a guiding narrative, a path or way, to transform your chaos back into order. These myths reflect our internal process of confronting the unknown, rebuilding our lives, and growing stronger. Part 6. The Way and the Journey of Transformation. Many cultures speak of a way. In Christianity, it might be called the path of righteousness. In Buddhism, the Noble Eightfold Path. In Taoism, simply the Tao. They are all pointing to a similar idea, a journey toward a better, more meaningful state of being. These stories often follow a pattern, stable order. Life is going along in a predictable way, a comfort zone, unexpected disruption. Something chaotic, frightening, or new appears. Dissolution into chaos. You realize your old way of doing things no longer works. Life feels overwhelming. Renewal or rebirth. You struggle, learn, adapt, and eventually establish a new order, one that is hopefully better than before. Seen this way, myths aren't mere superstition. They are sophisticated maps for how humans respond to crisis, learn from it, and build new ways of living. This is something science alone can't guide us through, because science tells us how the physical world operates, but not what to do when our relationships fall apart or when we lose our sense of purpose. That's the realm of myth. Part 7. Bringing Science and Myth Together. You might wonder, do we have to abandon science to value mythic thinking? Absolutely not. Science and mythology need each other. Science helps us understand the factual structure of reality, how disease spreads, how technology can advance, how to improve material living conditions. Mythology reminds us of our psychological and social realities, how to handle fear, uncertainty, betrayal, hope, and moral conflict. Here's why this matters more than ever. We live in a world where technology can do almost anything. Clone animals, manipulate genes, connect billions of people instantly. But ask yourself, what should we do with these powers? No scientific formula can answer that. It's a moral and philosophical question. Without a shared framework of meaning, we risk using our technologies in destructive ways, damaging societies, the environment, or even the human psyche. If we rediscover the wisdom hidden in ancient stories, we might create a moral framework that keeps pace with our scientific knowledge. It won't be exactly what our ancestors believed, but it can be informed by their insights and by our modern understanding. It would be a worldview that respects the power of reason and evidence, while also recognizing that human beings are creatures of imagination, stories, and values. Part 8. Conclusion. Living meaningfully in a complex world. So, where does this leave us? Acknowledge both worlds. Realize that we each live in two overlapping realities. The objective world describes what is, and the mythic or narrative world deals with what matters. We need both. Embrace uncertainty. Our lives unfold amid the known and the unknown. We have moments of stability, work, routines, relationships, and then disruptions where chaos enters. Understanding that these disruptions are part of a universal human story can help us confront them with courage. Seek renewal. When life falls apart, mythic stories remind us that chaos often precedes growth. By facing the unknown, we discover new possibilities, learn, adapt, and rebuild a more resilient order. Create a shared vision. We desperately need moral and ethical guidance to direct our scientific and technological power. By studying the mythic traditions of the past, along with our ongoing ethical debates, we can craft a more coherent worldview, one that honors both rational thought and the human need for meaning. In the end, scientific discovery alone can't provide us with values, but the myths and stories we inherited aren't simply fairy tales. They're profound attempts to articulate the patterns of human experience, where we succeed, where we fail, how we recover, and how we can flourish. So let's not abandon the world of myth to embrace science, nor abandon science to return to myth. Instead, let's see them as complementary tools for understanding reality. One describes the factual structure of the world. The other tells us how to navigate that world as fragile, hopeful, moral beings. If we learn to integrate these perspectives, we can build a future that honors the best of what both realms can offer. Thank you.